Hello, we're from the Ethical Property Foundation, and just going to introduce you very quickly who we are. So we are a nationwide charity, and we act to provide property advice to charities and not-for-profits. So that's any property issue about anything. Obviously, quite a lot of the work that we do is in heritage, but we also work quite a lot outside of it. We provide a free property advice service to any charity and not-for-profit up to a certain level of time. We also provide paid-for solutions and work to support our free work that we do. We do quite a lot of training, we speak at a lot of workshops, conferences, things like that. And we also work with a register of property professionals, so that's people like solicitors, architects, surveyors, space planners, people like that who provide pro bono, so free and discounted help to the people that we work with. We are the in-house property advice team standing in front of you, so we're quite a small charity, but we like to think we punch above our weight. There's a lot of information on our website if you'd like to have a look, which is www.ethicalproperty.org.uk. We've got a big bank of resources on there about buying property, letting property, leasing it out, loads of different stuff. Also a bit of a plea, we're currently doing a big survey with the Charity Commission about speaking to the whole of the third sector all across England and Wales to see what property issues they're experiencing. We did it last year and we're repeating it to try and get a really good feel of what's going on so that we know where to target our support and we know what problems everyone's experiencing. So if you can fill it in, if that applies to you, we would very much appreciate it. It's on the website, so please do take a look. So, as was said, today we're going to be talking about making the most use of your building, and that's whether you are set up as an organisation specifically to look after one building, you know, that's your focus, or whether you're a pre-existing organisation that then seeks to take over a heritage building. So it's about making sure that that building is going to work, it's going to run, it's going to bring in income, you're going to be able to run it on a sustainable basis. It's very much a different case-by-case, you know, thing, really, this sort of work. You know, every building is so different. So that's why we've chosen to structure this as quite a few different case studies that we're going to run through and just talk about how they have worked and how they have made the best use of their space. Hopefully, we can all learn a bit from that. Ian's also going to show us a handout that you've all got on your tables, which we're then going to explore in more detail later, about making sure that your building is viable and not a liability. We are obviously dealing with a very wide range of things at one time, so please excuse us if the level is too low or too high for you, because I'm sure there's a lot of different experience in the room. There's a lot of people that are starting out, a lot of people who I'm sure have got plenty of experience, so please do feel free to ask questions or ignore the bits that aren't so relevant for you. I think that's all I was going to say. I don't know, Ian, if you think we should take questions as we go along, or whether it'd be better to do that at the end. What would you prefer?
If we do it at the end, I think it'd be easier if we do it.
Okay, let's do questions at the end then. All right, well, I'm going to hand over to Ian, so look forward to going through these examples with you, and do let us know what you think at the end. Here's Ian.
Okay, here's Ian. It's like being on a chat show, isn't it? Okay. We're going to, you've got a handout on the table called Viability, Not Liability. And I've put this on the table because I want you to think about the things I've listed on here, which are 10 things you need to know about your business case for taking on a building. And I know that there's a lot of experience in the room, and there is people with, as Ruth said, low levels of knowledge or coming into it, or have some particular issues that they can discuss with us later. But I thought, let's get our thinking in the right, let's start thinking in the right way, because I'm going to be talking about buildings in a very general way. I think the way in which the workshop was built was about leases, rentals, franchises, how to get commercial value out of your buildings. But it's a bit like talking about how long is a piece of string, and I only have a certain amount of time. So the way I've put this together is to talk about how a building makes a for you to think about how a building or structure makes a contribution to your organisational needs. And I say that because many of the charities that we work with can get obsessed with a building or a space that means more than just the building, the bricks and mortar that it's made out of, and can become a cause célèbre and blind them to the liabilities and the risks of taking on property or a property interest in something that can become pretty unmanageable. So as part of the training that we do for organisations, and some of the cases I'll show you are people that we've worked with their boards, with their staff, during the course of taking on a property, or as you'll see in the workshop after the presentation, again, which is another handout on the table, which I'll talk about in a moment. There are people starting out. There are charities that have come together. It's a new form. It's a building of substantial merit, and it has a lot of potential. But from an organisational point of view, they are still understanding the risks of taking this building on. And some of the cases I'll show you will give you different examples. So I'm going to show you examples of underuse, issues where buildings are too big, how you might think about maximising the use of space using our cases. Also, thinking about, is the space actually suitable for what you want to do in terms of an intended use, and if it's a heritage scheme or a heritage building or property, or it's restricted in some way, are you sure that you can actually do what you want to do in this building without it being too bureaucratic or too expensive, and can you actually change its use, which is about conservation of heritage and the integrity of the building structure itself. So the kind of 10 key things to consider in developing a business case in taking on a building are these things, in my opinion. We can have a big debate about what these things are, but just to run through some of these points. So first, what are you getting? Investigate the legal title. We have come across situations where people are selling buildings and they don't actually have the right to do that. And also, how you secure it is important, and actually what you are allowed to do with the building is important, because it's having legal title will make a difference to how much money you can raise against a building. The second thing about what you're getting is important, because too many people don't do enough research at the beginning about, one, what the legal title is, but also what the state of the building is like, the condition of it. And it's important to look at, before you spend any money, anything that exists on the building, existing surveys, existing reports, stock condition surveys, those kind of things. And if it is a heritage building and listed, there will be records, both locally and with English Heritage, if you need to research that. It will cost you nothing to do that. What works will be required. As you'll see in the exercise that we'll do later, there is a lot of hidden costs, and costs can spiral if there is risk built into any cost consultant work that you do. So it's important to look at what you can do in the short term, what the medium term is, any backlog on the building that may be with the existing owner, and all they're doing is passing you the liability of the backlog. You've then got to look at what your ongoing costs are in terms of your maintenance and what it costs to run the building. The thing about, is it a good deal? This is about valuations, and this is an interesting one. I'm going to jump straight to this slide because I'd like someone to tell me how much you think that is worth. This is about valuation. Come on, have a go. £3. £3? Yeah, sorry? Not that I was aware of. It didn't come up in the survey. Yeah. Well, I haven't seen the actual survey, but the one thing that was a problem there was contamination because it was a lighthouse. So it had hazardous materials which had to be removed. But the structure is stable. Sorry? No, it was mercury and something else. Yeah, it's that stuff for the lights. Heavy metals, yeah. Okay. Yes. Somebody said £3, £5. I put this up first because it's not strictly a building, but it's a structure. Sorry. I put this up first because it's not a building that you can live in, but it's a structure. And the issue of value is important in all community buildings or public buildings. And it is a debate that we have with landlords about value. You can get red book valuations, you know, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors type valuations. They will give you a market value. We say, if it's a public asset and it's being passed to the third sector, what is the kind of social value of that building? And that's always a difficult one for people to answer. And we, at the foundation, through our training and through some of our negotiations with landlords on passing assets from a local authority or a government department to the community, could be done for £1 on the basis of just underwriting the risk going forward because of the amount of social value that you can get out of that. And you could get a valuation of £1, like this was given a valuation of £5. It was just agreed with Trinity House that £5 gives you something that's shown on a piece of paper. Sorry, am I not? Move it away. All right, I'm following, okay. All right. So it's unique. So the valuation of this is a unique value which pertains to this structure. And I have the notes here, which I'm happy to circulate after we've done this. But what it's saying is that this was decommissioned in 2010. Was no longer of use, and a community interest company was formed in order to purchase this lighthouse with Blacknor Point Lighthouse, which is on the Bristol Channel, down in the West Country. And the deal was that Trinity House wanted this completed by a given date and drew up the sort of sale documentation. The CIC was formed by local people, local communities, purely so that it could stand there and be maintained through fundraising and volunteering. So they give it a clean up, they make sure that it doesn't fall down, and it's theirs now. So it exists as a public structure which the CIC looks after. The main costs, going back to the issue of value, is insurance. And the initial costs of decontamination, and then the ongoing maintenance, as I said, which is, there's no way in which you can get commercial value out of this, but because it's iconic and its location, and because it belongs to the kind of consciousness of the community in the area, and obviously the history of the channel in terms of lighthouses, and the family that lived in the area that looked after the lighthouse up to and after the Second World War, it has a kind of relevance to the area, and people donate, and a lot of people in the area volunteer their time just to kind of look after it. Next one. This is Oxford House in Bethnal Green in East London. Much more straightforward kind of scheme. An endowment, a Grade 2 listed building, an endowment from Keble College and the University of Oxford, as a settlement. There's a number of these around the country to sort of educate and provide welfare for the poor, so housing, education and health type issues. This is a fairly recent development. It was designated in 2011. It's run as a charity. I suppose it has an asset value of about 1.6 million. And the turnover of the organisation that runs this building, which is a kind of multi-use community hub, I suppose you would say, with a variety of different spaces in it, their turnover is about 400,000 a year, and the rental income is 350,000. So they get good rents. The issues here are the sustainability of the building and the cost of repairs. But also, one of the things that is interesting, again, that we talk a lot with our smaller charities, is that to make buildings work, if there's a public building, it needs to be open all the time. It's a public thing. It's like the debate you have with schools. Why are schools shut in the summer when people haven't got anywhere to take their children to? Sorry? 5 minutes? You're joking. Right, okay. So, this is open 7 days a week, 51 weeks of the year, and there is more information I can provide on that. This is Circa Media. This is a church. It's grade 2, a grade 1 listed. It's in Bristol. It's on a long lease. It's run by, it was saved from dilapidation and refurbished by the church's Conservation Trust in 2005. It won an award, and the organisation in this church are Circa Media, and they're a circus school. And they have a turnover of nearly $1 million a year. 55% of that, because of their specialism, come from student fees. But in terms of trading, like commercial activities, only 15% of their funding comes from actual commercial activities. The rest is kind of education, and 30% of their funding is from grants. But you can hire it out if you want to. You can do dry hire, just to use the premises, or you can use the circus facilities if you wish. The issues there, of course, are what's the value of that asset to the church? What's the value of the asset to Circa Media and 900,000 a year turnover? There's the cost of maintenance and insurance. Yep. This is a similar story to Oxford House. The issues here are, this is artist studios predominantly, about 15,000 square feet. The issue here is the lease has an option to buy within it for the artists who run the Jamaica Street Artist Studios, and they're trying to raise the money. The issue here is that they can't generate enough rent from the artists to capitalise the rents in order to get investment or loans so they can purchase the building. So they're in a kind of catch-22 because they're packed, but they can't put the rents up because the artists won't be able to afford it. They could do from a commercial point of view, but they drive the artists away. So it's a kind of, how do we get the money to purchase this building? And what's the asset value to the owner, and what's the value to the artists? And until they kind of get their rental incomes, or they get a benefactor in some way, they will struggle to get sufficient loans to purchase the property. But it's an ongoing case. It's an interesting one. We'll move on to the next one quickly. This isn't a listed building, but it won a design award. The issues here is that their income. This is Sunlight Development Trust in Medway. It's a former Gillingham Electric Laundry which served the docks in Kent, and it's on a long lease. And the Sunlight Development Trust is a charitable organisation that was set up to deliver health, arts and culture and environment and training and employment and a community radio and a whole pile of other things from this place. 50% of their funding is grants. And when those grants have reduced, they've had to go through a major restructuring. And while they were doing that, the FM radio service that they run from here flooded as well. So the issues here, major grant reductions, changing the way their business model is working, a flood risk area, so their insurance is now massive, and they've got cash flow problems because of the grants, and they can't get the rents up. So this is the life and times of the charitable sector, I'm afraid. But when I think there's an issue in the charity sector about whether you can do things commercially. Because for where I come from, commercial values are where you're driving every penny out of the asset. With charities, they have other issues that they want to take on board, which is the social value thing. It's always difficult to put a number on that. Next one, quickly. This is a smaller organisation in Basingstoke, a Grade 2 listed building, 8,000 square feet on 3 floors. Was a university building, so educational use, an ethnic minority community organisation, a kind of umbrella organisation, was offered this building by the district council at below a market rent at £3,000 a year, and we said, why don't you do £1? There is no market for £3,000 a square foot. This is a sort of social versus commercial argument. The issue here is that they can't raise enough rents to cover the staff and the maintenance and the operation of the building. There's just not enough space in there. But the council meets the costs of all repairs and insurance. So they've got a really good deal, but they're still struggling to pack this space out. Now, from a commercial point of view, you could fill up this space and make enough money. But from a charity point of view, it's difficult to do that because you want to have affordable rents. Okay. I think maybe because of time, we need to rush on a little bit. So I was going to talk about Westway purely because it's a non-space issue. This is not a listed building. This is the Westway that comes in and out of London from I think it's the A40. And it's exploiting spaces between structures. This is something we come across sometimes. It's about using derelict land and derelict land and buildings, which is an issue from a heritage point of view as well. This is not far away. This is a good example of a heritage building. This is the case study. So what we're going to do now, I think, if that's okay. Okay. Look, before we go to this, I just wanted to say one thing very quickly. The story of Blacknor Point Lighthouse and Shoot House in Basingstoke that I was just talking about it's not about commercial value. It's about taking the opportunity to find a market solution for something that's quite unique. So it's very difficult to value some of these things or act in a commercial way with some of these structures and buildings. You have to think slightly differently. And from a foundation's point of view, unique public buildings or making buildings publicly accessible should be done at the lowest cost possible to the people that are taking on the risk. And this is the battle we have with local authorities. And I don't know if there's any local authorities in the room, but it is a battle we have with them because they're driven by their idea of market rents and market values. But there are lots of mechanisms in place that they can use in passing public buildings to the third sector to make it, or to de-risk the operation, the ongoing operation, the sustainability of some of these buildings. So, on your table, is the Grove Trust. This is the workshop, which I'd like you to do on the table, and then you're going to feedback, I think has been mentioned. This is locally listed. This is a live case that we have at the minute. I'll give you 5 or 10 minutes to read through this. I'm not going to read it to you, you're not children. What's interesting is that English Heritage and the Heritage Lottery people are interested in this project because of the setting of the building, which is in a public park. And there is Grade 2 listed features within the park, and there is a parallel exercise looking at listing the whole of the park. This building is just one bit of the story of the park, and it's something that the foundation is working on with the local authority and a number of third sector organisations in the area. But what's interesting about this scheme is that it throws up quite a number of issues about the organisations involved, including the way in which the local authority thinks about this building, because it's currently occupied by children's services and they will be decanting at some point. But what it also does is looking at commercial operations within a building like this, as I've just hopefully demonstrated through the range of different schemes that we've been involved with, is not easy to do. But it's a challenge. So your challenge is to read through the preamble and the information I've provided here, which is very general, and start to think about, if you were in Sutton CVS's shoes, the charity's shoes, what would be the issues that you would think about here in taking this project forward? The aim being that you acquire that building. Time starts now.
Okay then, shall we all start to feed in our thoughts and see what issues we can pull out of this? Did you find that an interesting process to think through? I'm getting yeses, that's a good sign, excellent. Hopefully it reflects the work that a lot of you are doing in your own communities. So which group would like to go first? Shall we say you guys in the middle? There was quite a lot of laughing coming from that table, so no, we know you've been behaving yourselves. So who's going to be feeding back from you guys? Okie doke, shall I bring the mic? You can have my microphone.
Stand up. Well, one key point was the group was questioning the costs down on the sheet, and we thought that the community group on this project should probably bring in their own person to look at it and make sure the figures are accurate. We were questioning where this figure came from, and if the figure is actually not as expensive as thought, or possibly more expensive, that could have a really big impact on whether you want to do the project at all. One person mentioned that if the person who's doing a valuation on it isn't a specialist in historic buildings, that could make a really big difference. Another key point was that an options appraisal should be done on the property to really see what the possibilities are for commercial ventures to try and make it viable and try and make it more appealing to the council.
We also said that one outcome from our own valuation with our own team, our own architect, our own consultant specialist in the various skills, quantity surveying and so on, we also said that if the figures were very different and rather worse, we should not be afraid to go back to the council and say this will not do. You're going to have to, for the benefits that your community is going to get out of this in our hands, you're going to have to do better than simply hand this building over. You're going to have to find some money. You might not succeed, but you shouldn't be afraid to have that discussion. We also felt that out of the options appraisal, we should be prepared to look at a totally radical, different package of uses. We thought it was most unlikely that this was a convenient building for the CVS. It was far more likely that it would survive better and maybe even be commercially successful if it was developed as the hub for this marvellous park with so much to see, so much heritage, so many dog walkers, so many cups of tea. And having worked out that commercial part of it, we would see what was left for other voluntary community beneficial activities.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, I did hear that. Knock it down, get rid of it. Mean, terrible. So, who wants to go next? You guys, maybe? Yeah, who's going to be talking? Hand over to you.
Well, our group, that's off-putting, isn't it? Sorry about that. The Green Group. We considered a range of points about the case study. Our starting point was the fact that there's an awful lot of things that aren't known. There's a lot of leaps of faith and assumption that you need to make to really have a sensible conversation about taking this forward. So some of the unknowns that we considered were things like the first side of the sheet of paper seems to imply that we're talking about the whole estate, with the lodges and the different artefacts and the park area. Yet the second side of the sheet of paper is concerned with the house, and therefore the costings are about the house. So one key question is whether we are talking about the whole or we're just talking about one part of it. Because if we're talking about the whole, then certainly we need to consider the liabilities of that whole, but also we need to think about the scope for the whole to subsidise the house. So for example, if there's a lodge there, maybe that could be rented out as residential accommodation. Very low maintenance, low cost to do such a thing, but actually it could bring in maybe £8,000 to £10,000 to subsidise that £100,000 cost. So those sort of unknowns need challenging. Other unknowns were the council's contributions. There's mention of the rent-free period. What would the rent be at some point in the future? How long is that rent-free period? To what extent is the council contributing to that 250,000 backlog? So those unknowns were our first set of points, really. The way forward for us, we think, is to conduct an options appraisal, where there are a number of options that sort of spring to mind that need to be worked out and get those full financials done on them. The first links back to what I've already said, and that's about seeing the whole rather than just the house on its own, and how the whole can make the house a viable prospect. A second option would be just to look at the house as it is, consider that 30,000 rental hole that seems to be missing, and find a way to get commercial tenants probably in to fill that gap. That's quite a cold and dry option, if you like, but it could mean that the building is a net asset rather than a liability. And a third option would be about trying to really embrace the asset as a community heritage asset, and trying to celebrate the open space, because it's implied in this that under the council's ownership, the space itself hasn't been open and accessible, it's just been left undeveloped. So again, another assumption we're making is that we could celebrate the open space, bring people into it, and that opens up a whole range of possibilities that can bring in income. Things like tea rooms, things like events that can be held on the open space, and also weddings. I mean, the house looks fantastic. You know, what a glorious venue. So those sort of options in that third set could be several different business elements that all plug that rental gap that we're looking at and make it viable. The third point we want to make is that all through those options, we need to consider the conservation management aspects and interpretation of the buildings that are there to preserve what seems to be the core theme of this, which is that it's there for generations to come. All right.
Excellent, thank you. Particularly, thinking about the unknowns, things that you don't know from that example, but in your own organisations, very, very important to keep an eye on. Would you guys like to go next? Who is going to speak? This lady, here you go.
Cheers, thanks very much. Right, well, we get maximum value out of our 3 points because there's sub-points to go through. Basically, we've broken it up, the 3 issues, into one is maximising the use of the space, looking at how any extra space can be used in ways that can generate income, even including a bit of residential, if that was possible. But on the other hand, would the lease accommodate that? So there's a real issue here about looking at how the space can be used to the best effect. The second issue is the setting, the park itself, which is really very special, and whether that can become part of the solution as well. And we also talked about weddings and events and cafes and everything within that setting to maximise income. But there is clearly an issue, or appears to be an issue, and we did have some inside intelligence from one of our members who's local to the area, that access isn't great. So I think that's something that could actually put a cap on visitor numbers if that's not radically looked at. And the third area is the whole issue of the lease, and in a way the need to play hardball with the local authority. 20 years doesn't sound like a long enough lease. Could we maybe look at something like a community asset transfer on a much longer lease, maybe 99 years or longer for a quid, and looking at, within that, the running costs that are down there seem high. It could be that the building itself isn't energy efficient, and that could be looked at. So the running costs are probably a little bit over-egged, and they would need to be revisited. So basically, I think there's a job here to sit down with the local authority and revisit the figures and revisit the terms of the lease.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, always a very good tip to play hardball. Make sure you're getting the best deal that you can get. So finally, you guys over here.
Well, I think we're going to be we're touching on points that everybody else has raised already. So, as is said before, looking at the looking at the 20-year lease and getting that extended to get the peppercorn rents has been discussed. Looking at other activities that are going on in the park to kind of use all those visitors that were already there, opening a cafe, and possibly looking at the volunteering section of the building and using those volunteers to run the cafes, possibly looking at some indoor play space to attract children to the park and trying to get income streams through selling kind of those activities and using those parts of the building for those events. Wedding venues, which has already been touched on. I don't know if there's anything we've missed. No? I think we've got everything. Everyone said it.
Oh, excellent. Well, it's good to know that people are covering similar issues, because it's obviously, hopefully it's been clear enough for people to understand where those are. Hope that was enjoyable. Hope you got something out of it. That's the end of our bit. So Ian and I are going to be around for the next while to do advice surgeries with anyone that wants to discuss their own situation. And yeah, thank you very, very much. And please do look us up, have a look at our website, and get in touch if you need us. Thanks very much.